Matt, there's a
Yes.
lot of different regulations coming down.
Hmm.
What are you seeing being introduced that will affect business?
It's a very broad statement. There's many regulations coming out right now affecting all different types of businesses out there. The digitization transition is really getting governments to look at current legislation and adapt it if needed. We've got digital asset frameworks being released all over the world right now. 37 central banks around the world coming out with new digital currencies, digital identities. So legislation needs to be laid down in order to, facilitate all of this. Over the last couple of years, we've seen some legislation come out of Europe, such as the GDPR legislation, which is the General Data Protection Regulation. Basically stands for how individuals should be looking after their own data and the right to be forgotten, and other use cases too. And then the other important regulation that I kind of saw coming out of Europe was the Payment Service Directive 2, which was the right for third parties to interact with banks' data through APIs, which obviously changes the banking industry, changes how business can interact with banking information and financial information, and provide new wealth applications, personal wealth applications, or financial support, or whatever it may be from third parties. So regulations, in short, are definitely coming out all over the place right now in terms of affecting businesses. Positive in the innovation aspect towards small to medium enterprises, and could be seen as opportunistic or threatening towards the like of big institutions and like banks that are going to have to innovate so that competition doesn't compete.
That's great. Paul, would you want to add anything to Matt's commentary there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think going back to the Panama Papers several years ago, that really set forth, I think, some strong recommendations by the Financial Action Task Force. I believe they put out 40 recommendations to provide a complete set of countermeasures against money laundering, law enforcement, and financial systems as it relates to regulations and international cooperation. That's a bit of a mouthful. There was a lot of things that really stirred up the virtual asset service provider world in the cryptocurrency space when they came out with Travel Rule 16. That really affected a lot of the exchanges that were out there. They had to actually, the travel rule required them and obligated them to obtain and hold and transmit required originator and beneficiary information in order to identify and report suspicious transactions, which I thought was quite interesting, considering a lot of the exchanges weren't doing that. And it's that fine balance where you do want to have privacy when you're transacting, but on the other hand, you do need regulations in order to move digital assets around. Really, really interesting stat I read the other day came from Chain Analysis, actually, and they said that only 1% of all Bitcoin goes through the dark web. So there's really not a huge anti-money laundering issue as it relates to crypto assets. But nonetheless, they've come out with these rules, and I think it's easier to work within some of these guidelines as it relates to virtual assets and virtual and digital assets and service providers. So that's what I would have to say on that side of the Financial Action Task Force rules and guidelines.